The world reached a landmark in 2008 when, for the first time in history, more than half the population were now living in urban areas. Urbanization is naturally one of the most important aspects of the great transition from an agrarian to an urban industrialized society. For those that live in cities, especially those dreaming of escaping the city, it can be all too easy to forget just how transformative cities have become for human civilization. What we also may fail to recognize is the truly staggering investments of resources required to build and maintain our cities. But we would do well to give it some thought. The next few decades will see an unprecedented scale of urban growth, and we need to build cities for another 4 billion people. If you consider the environmental challenges urban living generates today, then imagine the challenges when the world's urban population doubles over the next 40 to 50 years. So how will this happen? When we look back 200 to 250 years ago, we can see how just like other aspects of the Great Transition, such as the demographic and dietary transitions, all countries go through an urban transition. Some just start later than others, depending on which wave they are in. Countries start with around 10 to 20% of their population in cities and end up with 80 to 90% living in cities. Urbanization has become an essential part of economic development during the Great Transition. Cities allow economies of scale, where dense populations justify investment in transport, communications, utilities, and other infrastructure, and create markets for new products and services. Urbanization creates economic growth, which in turn attracts more people to cities, which hence drives more urbanization. In a sense, as China's growth has presaged, the economic opportunities in the next half-century will be equal to the opportunities of the last 150 years, including China's. Cities also have important roles in social transformation. They are centers of cultural, scientific, and technological innovations. Dense populations also allow better access to health care, as well as more specialized health care. As we saw in the video on demography, urbanization, improved health care, and economic growth lead to smaller families and longer lifespans. In other words, urbanization is a prerequisite for human development beyond the agrarian era. Rural environments cannot maintain today's world population, and further urbanization is for the foreseeable future both inevitable and irreversible. Some doubt cities' role as drivers of economic growth and improved standards of living, because many of today's urban dwellers are poor. This simply ignores the fact that the first-wave countries experienced exactly the same phenomenon during their initial urbanization. Cities at the beginning of the Great Transition in first-wave countries were not more attractive places to live. The difficult conditions were well described by authors as diverse as Charles Dickens and Karl Marx. Most moving to the cities did so as there were not enough opportunities in rural parts of the country. But the urban poor of the first-wave countries became far wealthier 2 or 3 generations later. The same can be seen now in the second-wave countries. Cities are the means through which humanity has been able not only to maintain larger populations, but raise their standard of living. Pre-1950s statistics are hard to come by, but by 1900, around 40% of first-wave populations had become urban, while the rest of the world remained almost entirely agrarian. This process is almost but not fully complete in the first wave. Urbanization took place more slowly in the first wave, as many of the factors necessary for urbanization were not yet in place. Urbanization required new building materials and power plants. When we think of the iconic images of urbanization in the United States, we think of the skyscrapers. The first skyscraper was a 10-story building in Chicago and was completed in 1885. It was certainly not the last. The thousands of skyscrapers in the U.S. were made possible by steel and cement and the electricity to power the lifts and lights. While those new technologies allowed cities to grow up, transport technologies allowed cities to expand outwards. Cars and public transport ensured that people could travel further distances to work. Finally, the advances in agricultural productivity allowed the countryside to feed urban populations in a far less labor-intensive way. Once these technologies were developed and put in place, other waves were able to more quickly follow the blueprint. In the 1950s, that urbanization began in the second wave. If we look at second wave countries such as China and Indonesia, their urban populations grew from around 12% in 1950 and have reached around 60% today. If we put that in absolute figures, China had only 65 million people in its cities in 1950. Now it has almost 900 million. China alone in the last 20 years has 400 million more people living in its cities, equivalent to around 40 New Yorks. According to government plans, it still plans to urbanize another 300 million. Third-wave countries such as Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan's urban populations have reached around 35% today. This means we can expect third-wave countries to add another 1.5 billion urban dwellers. The fourth-wave countries have also already reached 35% urbanization, although this hides wide variations between 4 to 5% in some countries and 50% in Nigeria. Thus, the fourth wave alone looks set to add another 3 billion urban dwellers. In the 20th century, we started with 260 million urban dwellers, and we reached 2.9 billion. By the end of the 21st century, we will reach 8 billion. Since the third and now fourth wave will see the bulk of urbanization over the next few decades, we are also projected to see the world's largest cities at the end of the 21st century to be from there. Here is a map to help. If today only 3 first-wave cities, Tokyo, New York, and Los Angeles, remain in the top 20, then by 2100, not even second-wave cities will remain in the top 20 cities, not even one from China. Multiple projections from reputable organizations, in fact, show that in 2100, the top 3 largest cities are all projected to be in Africa: Lagos, Kinshasa, and Dar es Salaam. If you cannot find them on a map today, then maybe you should start looking. This map does not tell us that the cities of the first and second wave will get smaller. It only tells us that the cities of the third and fourth wave will be getting much, much bigger. The population of Lagos in 2100 will be around 88 million, larger than 90% of countries today. In 1950, the population of Lagos was only 300,000. Today, it is already at 21 million, 70 times larger in just 70 years. Kinshasa in 2100 will have 83 million inhabitants, and Dar es Salaam around 74 million. All these cities require a great deal of infrastructure to be built. These investments alone are a key driver of economic growth during the Great Transition. There are 3 notable ingredients: steel, cement, and electricity. Steel and cement production grow along with growing urban populations, and then stabilize once the urban transition reaches completion. Today, global steel production is around 2 billion tons. But as urbanization continues to grow, so does demand for cement and steel. At least 50% of the world's capacity of steel and cement production was built during the last 25 years. In other words, production doubled. And we still need to urbanize at least 4 billion more people over the next 40 to 60 years. Thus, we can see that annual steel production will need to double again to meet both new and existing demand. Once cities are built, they also consume, and consumption per capita is far higher than for rural dwellers. Urban dwellers consume more of most things, as we saw in the previous video on the dietary transition, and we will see in the next video on energy. But we should note that urban dwellers consume around 6 times more energy than a rural dweller. This means that we can expect global electricity consumption to double to meet demand in the third and fourth waves. As we will see in the energy video, we can expect a significant share of that to be from coal. We should also note air conditioners and cooling appliances. Most of the third and fourth wave countries have climates far warmer than first wave countries. As a result, projections show a rapid increase in the number of air conditioners in their cities from 1.5 billion units today to 5.6 billion in 2050. It is hard to imagine living in an apartment in a city on the equator without good air conditioners. You need the same air conditioner in your car, whether or not it is a Tesla. You also need a fridge. Yet these appliances leak F gases hundreds or thousands of times more aggressive than CO2. Urbanization, as we understand it today, began only 100 years ago and is not yet complete. But already it has transformed the planet. In the next 40 to 60 years, we can expect the world's urban population to double. This is inevitable and inescapable. This represents a far higher quality of life for these new urban dwellers, with better incomes, diets, health care, and entertainment. But both urban living and the transition to urban living is highly resource intensive, requiring vast quantities of steel, cement, electricity, and much more. This will exacerbate the already immense pressures on our planet. Pressures we will continue to explain throughout the remainder of this course.